Hi everyone. For those of you following along with the Timothy Jones Jr. trial, you know that today was the closing arguments in the penalty phase of this trial, and it was also, the verdict was in less than 2 hours, and the sentencing. So let's take a look at what happened today. We're going to be discussing this in a live tonight, and if you're watching this after June 13th, then you can still find that live up and check out that discussion. Just go to the videos on our channel. So the prosecutor was really on fire today. He had a great closing argument for this, and he just really hit it out of the park here, driving home the tragedy, the horrific nature in which Jones murdered his 5 children, and showing that it was one of choice. Okay, and he imposed a verdict of death on his children, and that the jury should look at the fitting sentence for Jones is death. But let's look at how this came about, okay? He said, "Is there any crime more horrible than what you have heard about when you came into the courtroom?" And he recalled the teacher's testimony and how they loved the children, and the other's testimony that depicted the Jones children as some of the most beautiful kids you will ever see. And he asked us again, is there any crime worse than this? He chose to be a murderer. You know, he went on to say Tim could have chose to do a lot of things. He had a summa cum laude degree in computer science, computer engineering. There was many things that he could do. This was a choice again. Hubbard said that if any of the jurors had doubts whether Jones deserved the death penalty, they should just consider the 5 garbage bags and where he, Tim, dumped the bodies of his children in rural Alabama. He stated that Tim Jones has been selfish his entire life, and he went into how he tried to break up his father's second marriage with Carolyn, and that was because he wasn't getting enough attention. It had to be me, me, me. And he went from that into a marriage with Amber where he tried to control her every decision and told her what she would do. She would stay home. She would have child after child. They would get animals. She would take care of them too. And she would homeschool the children, etc. When Amber left, Hubbard said Jones couldn't stand that his control was over. So he controlled her with the custody of the children. This computer engineer with an $80,000 a year job mistreated any of the children who showed an inclination of wanting to be with their mother instead of him. In this way, he punished Amber and the children. In his argument, Hubbard also channeled the Bible to describe the stern way Jones practiced his Pentecostal faith. This is a man who says, "I'm Mr. Christian." He used scripture for control. The Bibles were bricks. He would beat them over the head with it, smacking his hands together loudly and shouting, "You will do right." Hubbard emphasized his point. Paraphrasing the biblical sayings, Hubbard shouted, "You shall have no other love for anyone other than me. I will not be shared with anyone. I will have your full devotion, or you will feel my wrath." The word according to Tim. Hubbard spoke about how Tim had no problem moving a freshly turned 17-year-old into his home and around his children, having relations with her while maintaining that he believed in the literal interpretation of the Bible. Hubbard ridiculed testimony by defense witnesses, including psychologists and psychiatrists, that Jones was the product of a hellish upbringing in a dysfunctional family and was genetically disposed to severe mental illnesses. The only pattern you see here is bad choices, not the product of some DNA milkshake, he said with scorn. He chose to be who he was, a murderer. Jones first killed 6-year-old Nathan in a white-hot rage after the boy confessed on the phone to his mother. Okay, remember, Jones was PTing Nathan to get a confession out of him, and Amber calls, and within seconds the boy confesses, but not to his father, right? To messing with these electrical outlets. That's what ignited Tim, okay? Over the next several hours, Jones, said he was effed and decided that he was going to do what he needed to do, which was to sentence his own children to death. So over the next several hours, Jones went and got cigarettes, taking his older daughter Mira with him. Why did he take Mira with him? Well, Hubbard says because he didn't want her to call for help. So he left 7-year-old Eli alone, home with his dead brother and his 2 baby siblings. He then made a decision, just like the jury has to. The prosecutor said he sentenced his children to death. In a confession, Jones said he strangled 7-year-old Elias with his hands, so hard that he broke the bone in his neck. He chased down 8-year-old Mira, who was screaming, "No, no, no," and her last words, "I love you, Daddy." He looked into her eyes and choked the life out of her. He used a belt to choke 2-year-old Gabriel, saying his hand was too big, because he must have tried it, Hubbard said. And then he used that same belt and he cinched it tight around Gabriel's neck and choked the life out of him. And then 1-year-old Abigail followed. That deserves death and not life, Hubbard said. A life sentence is just sending Timmy to his room, where he pointed out that the guys in Intel and his own father said Timmy is fine being in a room, to make him think about what he has done, Hubbard said. And he said the real thing that is with Timmy, he didn't mind being in a room, but he minded if he was losing affection. And this whole situation has brought about everybody giving affection and caring about and wondering if Timmy was okay. So he had exactly what he wanted. He was trying to tell the jury. Sending him to his room to think about it is giving him exactly what he wants. Hubbard shared the hopes and dreams of the children, like Mira, who wanted to be a nurse, and Eli, who loved and thanked God for his brother Natan. He showed the drawing that Eli made and read what Eli wrote, as well as what Mira wrote about wanting to grow up and be a nurse, and how she wanted to be a fantastic daughter and do well in school and with her work. Hubbard ended his closing argument with those garbage bags, holding up envelopes containing photos of what was inside those bags that were entered into evidence. Jurors would have the opportunity to open and look at them during their deliberations. If you have any doubt for the appropriate sentence for that man, look in the bag, Hubbard said. The defense focused on what Jones's lawyers call undiagnosed schizophrenia, made worse by drugs and alcohol. Jurors last week rejected their arguments that Jones was guilty by reason of insanity or mental illness. During his closing argument, defense lawyer Casey Secor focused on how much Tim Jones is loved by his family, even after the killings. His grandmother, his father, and siblings all asked jurors to spare his life. How much more death does the Jones family have to endure? How many more funerals does this family have to go to? How many more tears do they have to shed? How much more heartache do they have to endure? Secor said, "You can punish Tim severely with a punishment of life in prison without the possibility of parole, and be merciful to the people who still love these children," Secor said. Repeatedly, Secor reminded jurors that only one of them was needed to vote for a life sentence, and if any individual juror felt life was the right sentence, he or she had the power to block a death sentence. "Blessed are the merciful," Secor told the jurors, quoting Jesus in the Gospels. "Let mercy be your first concern. You can punish Tim severely with a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The heartbreak of this family is unfathomable. There do not have to be any more deaths." 1 hour and 50 minutes. The jury deliberated for 1 hour and 50 minutes to arrive at a unanimous verdict that Timothy Jones Jr. will die for killing his 5 children in 2014. The jury of 7 men and 5 women passed final judgment today in one of the most horrific criminal trials in South Carolina history. Timothy Jones Jr. showed no emotion with the verdict. He smiled at times in the minutes after and chatted with his defense attorneys. He left the table once before the judge returned from speaking with the jury. The verdict came on the trial's 21st day after more than 60 witnesses testified for the defense and the prosecution. Judge Eugene Bubba Griffith formally sentenced Jones to death on November 30th, 2019 by electrocution or lethal injection. There will likely be years of appeals before the state carries out the death sentence. Moreover, like some other states, South Carolina is currently unable to procure the drugs needed for lethal injection. In a press conference held in the courtroom after the verdict, Hubbard, standing with his fellow prosecutors Sean Graham and Suzanne Mays, and Lexington County Sheriff Jay Kuhn, along with 2 law officers from Mississippi who helped crack the case, said, "Justice was done. There has not been a day or night when I haven't thought about this case," Hubbard said. "Those 5 little babies finally got justice. They've been on our minds and hearts, and today's the day they got justice." Asked what he found especially unforgettable, Hubbard thought for a minute and said, "Natan. He was the focal point. That little 6-year-old bore a lot for a long time. No child should ever have to go through what he went through. And because of what he went through, his father turned on those 5 other children. It begins with that, and it ends with that." Justice for Mira, Elias, Natan, Gabriel, and Abigail. There is no footprint too small to leave an imprint on this world.